Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to EWC Insights Asia Pacific Environmental Transitions. I am Panwin Yoking, a research fellow at the East-West Center, and I am delighted to be moderating today's event. Thank you for joining this event live, and thank you to those who are watching the recording. Our EWC Insights this afternoon features Douglas Woodring. Douglas is the founder and managing director of Ocean Recovery Alliance. He also founded the Plasticity Forum on Innovations for Plastic in its Second Life and co-founded the Commitments Accelerator for Plastic Pollution, which is a global incubator for plastic waste reduction programs. He is a UN climate hero and also a Google Earth hero, and has worked with both the UN Environment and the World Bank on plastic pollution issues. He was awarded the Prince's Prize from Prince Albert of Monaco in 2018. Douglas has worked in Asia for over 25 years and has a dual master degree from the Wharton School and Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies in Environmental Economics. He has a bachelor's degree from UC Berkeley. And in his talk today, he'll be focusing on reducing Southeast Asia plastic footprint. And before we start, just a brief note on the session's logistics. Douglas' presentation will be approximately 40 minutes long. Then we will transition to a 20-minute Q&A session. To participate in the Q&A session, please submit your suggestions, comments, and questions in the Q&A box down below. And we will try our best to get through as many questions as possible. And just a quick announcement that the next EWC Insights will be focused on Asia-Pacific political transitions with Dr. Victor Char, scheduled to be speaking on October 20th at 2 p.m. And his talk will be focusing on alliance decision-making in the context of US and China. And more information will be posted on EWC website's event page. And in the interest of time, I will end the introduction here and hand the stage over to Douglas to start his presentation.
Penwin, thank you very much. And thank you to Richard and Jeff and everyone at the East-West Center. It's great to be here today from Hong Kong, and I wish I was there to join you in Hawaii, but being in Asia gives us a lot of different opportunities to learn and understand what's going on in this part of the world vis-a-vis plastic. I've been out here for over 25 years and do a lot with the water, and that's basically how I got interested in this space. Protecting the ocean. My first job out of UC Berkeley was in Japan. I was one of the first gaijin to be working with one of the largest fishing companies in the world, trading seafood. And what I really learned at that time was how much we take out of the ocean in volume, all countries, without really knowing about it. And I thought at that time, this is truly unsustainable. People aren't really watching. Everyone wants sushi. Sushi was the big trend and fad at that time, which I think had a very big detriment in pulling a lot of the exclusive species and big fish out of the water just for that trend. But I said to myself, I want to use my future sometime when I have the chance to help the ocean. I also am a competitive swimmer. I also compete in outrigger racing internationally. So some of you in Hawaii will know that. But the access to the water on a regular basis is what is given me, especially in Asia, the chance to see and touch plastic in its environment in the water much more than people in a normal city life. And I think that brings an interesting angle with any athletes to be stronger ambassadors to the outdoors and the areas they like to recreate in and compete in. So one of the biggest challenges of our time, along with climate change, is plastic. I would say it's even more complicated actually than climate change. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily stronger in terms of impact, but there's over 40,000 types of plastic based on colors, types, chemicals, melting points. And even though they live in 7 different families, it's very, very difficult to re-aggregate them and put them back into a place where they can be used. Now, this image is obviously a bad image, but technically every single thing in this image could be some kind of value added end result product, whether that's energy, gasification, or in this case, the boys collecting straws, because someone said, I'll give you a little bit of money for the straw material that you collect. So as soon as we as a community and a culture put any value on the waste that we're not doing today, there will be an economic cycle started, which will help to alleviate that from being waste. So be collected. No one has globally, no one has to pay to play, which is pay to pollute. Everyone can export, everyone can sell pretty easily these days. The other challenge is education. Many people say we've got to educate more, we got to get out to schools. Unfortunately, in many parts of the world, this is the norm. And so this was in Hong Kong on a beach 4 years ago. It was basically a solidified oil spill. And everyone still went to the beach. They went clamming, they had fun, they didn't call anyone, they didn't try to pick anything up, because this is what they grew up with and they didn't expect anything really different. And so when we think about education, we have to think about all the people around the world who have grown up in this scenario. And as a teacher, they don't necessarily have it in their heart or their head to be teaching strongly about these topics to the kids, because for them, it's just the way things are. And that's a challenge we have to get over as a community in the education space. Effectively, this is what we've been doing to the world. This may not be pollution itself, but it's silt, but it signifies what we've been basically doing, which is just letting stuff go into the ocean, overfishing, taking things out. The mantra used to be the solution to pollution is dilution. The ocean is too big to fail, and we can let it go in, it will disperse, it won't hurt anyone, but that's a big problem. And today, we have over 450 dead zones around the coastal areas, mainly because of effluent from our rivers. That's both agriculture and industrial. And that has a big impact on people who live in these countries on the coastline. 60% of the world's population is near the coastal region. And if the mangroves are gone from development, they can't stop storms. If the coral reefs are gone for a variety of reasons, whether it's temperature, dynamite fishing, cyanide, bad tourism, the communities around there who are trying to be resilient with climate change cannot do that easily when they can't even fish and they can't find local resources for them to survive on, not to mention their water source and their waste management, particularly when there's big floods and things. So some of you might have seen this image before. Birds are really one of the only ways to check regularly on plastic inputs into an animal. There's a few. This is an albatross that has been feeding its babies colored pieces of plastic because it mistakes that for food. And we know of the big animals that get impacted, the whales and the turtles. But it's worth remembering that in the ocean, there is no body count. That means we don't really know how many animals have died in the ocean, because only if they happen to land on the beach do we find out that they died. And then we open up their stomach and we find out these days that there's a lot of plastic in almost every of those animals. But anything that would have died at sea, we will never know. And so there's no way to actually calculate what has been happening in the last 40 or 50 years based on plastic impact. What we have to remember, it's not just about the ocean. Ocean is what gravitated all of us to this topic, but every single animal in the world will try to eat plastic if it can fit in its mouth or it smells a bit like it. Giraffes, cows, pigs, dogs, cats, birds. You've probably all seen it. And that is a reminder to all of us that this all starts from land. 80% of everything in the water comes from land. And even though fishing contributes a bit with nets, that's not a B2C issue. That's not a consumer issue. Very hard for the general public to fix that part, but we certainly can fix with our brands and our companies and legislation improvements on the way we package. This is an example of a camel in Dubai in the desert. Camel had eaten plastic and it's in the garbage for maybe 10 years. And this gastrolith grew, thanks to Marcus Erickson, who found it. to be about 200 bags and maybe 10 kilos worth of stuff in his stomach. Finally, the camel couldn't survive anymore and died, and this was found in his bones. So the point is that this is all coming from our territory, not the ocean territory. One of the reasons it all happens is there's very few rules or incentives on how to use materials. Today, retailers are able to put things out on the shelves as they wish, and there's no incentive or there's no mechanisms or policies for them to bring it back, to get it back into recycling. Why do we put plastic around an aluminum sunscreen container? You know, people are not thinking as adults on how we package and sell our products. But as a retailer, all of these things could be recycled very easily and in an uncontaminated way if they get them back from the consumers. They stack all of these apple crates up. Same thing with strawberries and blueberries, and all of these other types of containers could easily be recovered from the consumers if there was a program that brought people back into the stores to bring back some of their materials. So it's not just about the consumers, it's about supply chain. How can we use a reverse supply chain? How can the brands and companies, retailers get their employees and their consumers more engaged? But again, packaging with things you don't need is an easy win, and it's a way to get a lot of low-hanging fruit out of this story. Why do we need fruit socks on coconuts, then wrapped in plastic? Why do we need a plastic bag on every single Coke that McDonald's gives out? This is a practice they do only in Asia. Why do we need these on the apples? The retailer could be pulling all of these off of the apples at the point of retail, put them in a box so the consumer never touches them, so they don't disperse into the community. And technically, these can be recycled. So we need some, maybe new thinking on how we use our packaging. This is one of the main reasons we have a big issue with plastic and waste. The line going up the graph is consumption of plastic in the last 40 to 50 years and how we use it. The bottom line is the scary part. That is the amount of infrastructure spending in recycling and waste management around the world. There's no Elon Musks in this space. There's very little now there's a bit more excitement, but even 5 years ago, there's not a lot of big innovation. Then we got to remember that these innovations need to go everywhere, every community. Waste is distributed into communities. It is not something that you just get one big machine and put it in one city. So this gap is why we have such an issue, because there's nowhere to put the material that we create in its second life after its first use. This is a graph on recycling versus GNP or GDP per capita. Shows you that the more rich or wealthy a city or state is, the more likely they are to have curbside recycling, pick up from your house or your building. But as you can see on the left side, most countries simply do not have that infrastructure set up. They haven't made the payments for it. They haven't designed it. It hasn't been a first focus of them. There's many other things they have to do as their economies grow. And therefore that waste gets put elsewhere in the wrong places. So some of the things we've done to help fix this and might inspire that anyone in the world can use this. 10 years ago, very early on, we launched the Plastic Disclosure Project at the Clinton Global Initiative. It was the first plastic footprinting methodology in the world. And in the last 18 months, even during COVID, we've been working with the UN in Bangkok and their Sea Circular program to train 10 companies and 2 municipalities in both Thailand and Malaysia how to undertake the PDP. And one of the things to remember, everyone talks about the SDGs, 14, 17 is really related to the ocean, but the ripple effect with plastic pollution touches many, many more SDGs. Responsible consumption, number 12, partnerships and collaborations, but there's many there with environmental impacts and many with social benefits, all related to plastic and waste. So any of you out there, please feel free to get engaged and be proud about these points. The PDP is about measuring and managing. If you do not measure what you have, you can't manage it, and you can't get into a circular economy. There's no way you can circulate if you don't know what you have. And so this is finally, we are probably 8 years too early for this kind of program for companies and municipalities to really want to know their waste footprint and their plastic footprint. But now it's a hot topic because this whole topic of plastic pollution is the second biggest in the world next to climate change at the moment. So the power of the PDP is it brings transparency, especially these days. ESG, environmental and social governance, is very important for investors, pension funds, and the finance world. Even banks who are giving green loans want to know now, not just about the carbon, not just about the water, not just about child labor, but how are you managing your resources and your waste and your packaging? Is your brand name on the package? Is that a potential liability? Municipalities can do great things by really focusing in on their own waste footprint and really where things are being managed. This helps with compliance. It helps with motivating the employees to understand why they're focusing in on plastic. Brings all kinds of operational efficiencies. And so some of the ways that companies or institutions can make broad improvements, increasing recycled content, that's probably one of the biggest, most important things we all need to do. If you're a government and you put out a tender to buy thousands or hundreds of thousands of pieces of something, put in the spec that you want 10%, 20%, 30% recycled content. If we don't create the demand for recycled content, the pull, it does not come in through the recycling system. And that's one of the biggest things that's been lacking. Improve recycling programs. That doesn't mean just putting a few recycling bins in a school or a street corner. It means getting your employees engaged and working with the communities that you serve to have bring back programs, use reverse supply chain, and really think about where your materials go and what happens in the second life and how that is brought back. Obviously, you can reduce packaging where you can add multi-use of that packaging. You can reduce things in the back end of the supply chain. You can have new designs and new materials, whether that's bio-based materials or others that will be up and coming. So there's risks to business if you have, if you're not aware of your packaging and your products these days with social media. Very easy for people to pick out a brand and say, hey, how come your packaging is not really in order anymore? It's very easy for someone to see if a brand says we changed our packaging and they can go to the store and they see it's not changed. The labeling on it, how it's described, how it teaches people to do this, that, or the other. But there's also great opportunities, innovation in product and design, job creation, money saving, very strong on reputational risk. Reporting, this is all good for the investors and investment management world. And that's a very powerful lever. So this is the Plastic Disclosure Project. Anyone can do it around the world. Does not require bans, taxes, or legislation to get involved. So some of the points that came out of Malaysia and Thailand, that people realize that the PDP, when you do it and you get the first baseline, it's really just the beginning of your story and your journey into managing your plastic use better. We're not saying don't use plastic, but we're saying make sure you don't make plastic waste at the end of the day or from your products. How can you get it back? How can you use more recycled content? How can you minimize something? And and there's no right or wrong number, but the point is if you don't have a number, then you can't manage anything. So find out the number, find out what your footprint is, your overall impact and use, and then you can spread out your management. Now it gives motivation to employees. New policies are created, new policy decisions, and it really helps with people thinking about larger scale collection of materials, even with other third parties who they may never have collaborated with before, but they may have similar waste streams. So something we often hear about is recycling doesn't work. It's dead. It's not the solution. Well, it has to be part of the solution. There's no physical possible way that with the amount of plastic we've created in the world that recycling cannot be part of that solution unless you simply want to burn it and bury it. So when you look at the numbers today, especially when the brands have made very large commitments recently to use more recycled content, recycling is starting to boom. The problem is the infrastructure is not there to make it happen. The supply chain is not there yet, and that's where we start getting into Asia. When you think about plastic pollution versus climate change, 2 billion people a day are impacted by plastic pollution. That doesn't happen yet with climate change. So that includes bad water, bad drinking, bad health, bad tourism, bad agriculture, bad fishing, very bad for the ecosystem. All of these things technically can be solved with something that just left someone's hand. All plastic trash is waste, has left someone's hand before it became waste. Think about that. So it's not everyone's fault that they're putting it in the wrong place. The infrastructure is not there for these things to get done. But without this large scale waste recovery and recycling, there will be many, many more times plastic in the environment than there are today because the infrastructure can't take care of it. Only 10% of the world's plastic that's produced actually gets to recycling, even though almost all plastic is actually recyclable technically. This is not a technical issue. This is a infrastructure and a social movement issue, because the policies around the way we sort and collect waste from our homes and our offices need to change in order to get better quality, uncontaminated material from our use into the system that can use it. So when we talked about pledges, both governments and large brands made very big pledges to use more recycled content in the next 4 or 5 years, up to 20 to 30%. Nestle just said that they will be spending $2.1 billion to buy recycled content by 2025 for their products. And that is the great sucking sound we need to show the recyclers and the community of recovery and collection that there is a demand for all of this product. And the plastic industry is a $4 trillion business. It is not going to go away soon. And we need to decide and figure out how to work with them along the way. So with over 340 million tons every year put in the market, there's a very large value of material that is not being recovered. In the US landfills alone, a couple years ago, from As You Sow did a study, just packaging, not even the actual products, just packaging is worth $8 billion for plastic in US landfills. Some of you might have heard about the Basel Convention that was set up in '89 to slow down and stop the trade of hazardous materials. And just this January, a new amendment was added into the Basel Convention to add plastic to that list. Now that's dirty plastic and plastic waste, not clean plastic and plastic as a commodity that needs to move between in order for this big demand for recycled content to be met. The challenge is that a lot of the press and a lot of the people feel that plastic should not be moving between countries. And essentially what that does, it means that you're allowing only one-way trade into all countries around the world from the big brands who export all of their products to those countries. And now all of a sudden, the smaller countries have no way to process it, no manufacturing to absorb it, and nowhere to send it to. So it goes to landfill, open pit burned, and all kinds of problems. So we've got to make sure this policy does not backfire on the planet, which is actually starting to happen right now. This is the similar chart that I showed you before. This is the circularity gap. Circularity is the movement of materials in a nice circle in a way that it keeps that type of product in use, even if you redefine it, grind it up, use it again, but it's kept being used for many, many years. The estimation, if we're going to use recycling and decrease this gap, we need to spend over $55 billion in the next 5 years just on equipment and infrastructure to achieve these goals. underinvestment will mean that all of the brands that are now looking for 20 or 30% recycled content around the world can't get it because the supply chains do not exist. And it's very difficult these days to get material from one country to another, which is a valuable feedstock to feed this reprocessed and value added content. We need at least 5 to 6 times of new mechanical recycling machinery in the next 20 years. And the total amount spent is over 400 billion is the estimate of what we need. So that's really where there's opportunity to get machinery and equipment, not necessarily big, but into the right size communities, scaled for the size of the communities that it's going to serve. Villages, towns, counties, states, not just big super cities. So there's a demand gap over what all of the companies have said they want to use recycled content. In the next 5 years, there's a demand gap of up to 6 million tons of recycled content that so far can't be met. The market growth for that in the next 5 years is up to $45 billion and growing at 30% from 2020. And this will increase the demand for large, untapped, beneficial opportunities, including very big job creating opportunities by bringing this feedstock, which has so far been fairly uncollected, into the global trade and recycling regime. So someone asked us, does the West just export all their waste to the East and then it ends up in our beaches? Well, one thing we have to remember is countries usually don't do the exporting, it's people, it's traders. And in the last 10 or 15 years, when China, the big sucking sound from China, when it was growing so fast, they needed materials everywhere. There was very little enforcement and a lot of buyers in China were buying anything around the planet. And that's when things got a bit messy. So there was a lot of shipments of waste and material that were just being bought by new players in the recycling industry. And that went to different countries and couldn't get processed because it was too dirty. And that's where it basically brought on the onslaught of amendment for. But now, because of China closing its doors in 2018 to a lot of the plastic recycled content, a lot of the recyclers fled China to other countries to set up their factories for recycling. What this also did is it helped to slow down the recycling industries domestically of the countries that have shut down. The reason for that is most countries don't have good domestic collection and recovery capacity to feed the machines of the recyclers. So they were buying it from other countries and they were using that to have sustainable, consistent supplies of material to keep their recycling factories running. So when they leave the country, then that country has a couple of problems. There's less people who know the real recycling industry and there's less demand for the domestic supply of collection. So we have to remember how these impacts work. We also have to remember that the places like the stock market are really what drive the hollowing out of manufacturing, which has gone to Asia and other parts of the world from some of the West, which was expensive. So not only did we hollow out manufacturing, we put out the waste. Australia, much of Europe and Japan, they collect things through their recycling bins, but it was all processed overseas. Now that it's harder to move overseas, it's backed up on our front doors in these countries because we never made the investment in the machinery and equipment and the pelletizing and the high value added to actually process our own waste. And that's the big dilemma and challenge that the world is facing right now. You can't move it easily and you can't process it in the right places. And we have to remember that the only way to really make circularity work for plastic is to have a global system, because most of the small countries cannot process it and absorb it in their manufacturing. So either get stuck in country or moved out. Also, exporting waste, have to think of it in a different way. if you're a brand and you export to 180 countries and it's recyclable in California and Netherlands, and the other 178 countries can't recycle it, then in a way we're exporting our waste to those countries that can't manage it. And that's a different way of thinking about how we do that. What do we need? We need many machines, not too big. We need grinders, shredders, compactors, washing machine. This is a big washing system in a recycling system and in Southeast Asia. And this is exactly what we need. Large scale machinery. In this case, it's pretty large scale, but you need the shredders and grinders to aggregate the materials from the villages and the towns and the counties to be able to get to these larger factories that can take bigger scale. The challenge is the funding of this and the financing, because most of this equipment is not tens of millions of dollars. It's $1 million, $500,000, $3 million. This is not what the Asian Development Bank or the IFC or the World Bank want to fund. It's not what a local bank will be funding, and certainly not what a venture capitalist will fund. So the challenge is really finding who is support and finance these thousands of pieces of equipment that needs to go out to all the communities to recover this material. So one of the other ways that we have played a role, if you assume that recycling is something that we all need to look at, and reduction of materials on the B2B side, we've really looked at rivers and streams and creeks. Global Alert is an app we also launched and announced 10 years ago. It was started about 5 years ago, partly funded by the World Bank. Allows you to report trash hotspots in the world's waters. It's like Waze for traffic. So any watershed in the world use the same platform and protect their creek, their river, their stream, their coastline. And this is important because it engages those communities on a centralized platform that they can all just manage locally. But we need to put the stakeholders together, an NGO, a government department, and students, high school students can be doing the reporting. And when you do this, we think rivers and the outflows. It's very important to think about the plastic as cholesterol. Cholesterol goes down the rivers, which are like arteries. The heart is the ocean. It's much easier to get plastic in the arteries than it is in the open ocean. And by just putting up booms and nets and catchment devices, very simple. They don't have to block boating. They don't have to block the animals. You just design it in the right way. Very easy to make a difference, right and left, clean and dirty. Then you start thinking, where does it come from? Can we recycle it? Can we reuse it? Can we prevent it? So in the Southeast Asia, we've done some neat work in Cambodia. We're replicating this in Indonesia soon when COVID is a bit easier to move with. But within an hour, we had the monks helping us pull plastic out of the trees in Cambodia. Because of the Tonle Sap Lake, the waters rise and fall 6 meters every flood season. So we have 2 events, one in the high season, the water rising festival, one in the low season, the water falling festival. And this is a way to engage local communities in an interesting way. We call it a festival. It's not a cleanup. And we get children, monks, fishermen. Now we have full support from the local government. And the next step, once we've got them engaged and thinking about appreciation of the outdoors, of the water, not to burn the waste, not to dump it in the water, is how can we have community management of the rivers? How can we put a boom up? How can we have showcase that this can actually really make a difference? Once we clean this lake and the river in Siem Reap, they'll then say, do not dump in that water because it will bring you bad karma. Now, they could never say that before, and most countries can't, because if the water's already dirty, people don't trust you. They don't trust the government. The water's dirty, I'll throw my bag in the water. No one will catch me. Once you clean it, you have a whole new slate to work with. And so now we're looking at ways to actually obviously reduce this material, but now that we've got them engaged, we have different ways that we can think about how to reuse the material in an effective way. And it might not be typical recycling, but it can easily be for new materials like concrete, asphalt, gasification, fuel. And these are just some of the examples. We had a nice, even during COVID, art gallery exhibit with the local government. And all of this has been done the last few years. But the challenge in these countries in Southeast Asia is they don't have the collection, they don't have the sorting, and they don't really think about the impact of organics mixed with plastic, the fact that you then can't use organics in your farmland because the plastic is there. They burn the plastic to get away. So we created a rice bag, but it's not a rice bag, it's a plastic collection bag. We handed these out to all village houses. And so they collect only their plastic in this bag. And when they return it to the pagoda or to the town hall, in COVID times, we were giving rice and food as a recovery sort of thank you. And this really is working. The government approved it right away. Once you get the clean feedstock of that plastic from their homes, you then have all kinds of potential to do something with it. As soon as it's contaminated and it's in the mud and it's with food waste, very to make that change to something valuable. Another couple quick things. Great art is something we created in Hong Kong 5 years ago, and now the Drainage and Services Department is asking us for another project. And I'm just showing it because any country in the world could replicate this. In the US, there's some stamps and some metal plaques, basically a reminder not to dump in the drain because the drain goes to the ocean. In our case, we used local artists and we made ceramic plaques and we cemented these to the curbside. And so you're bringing art for awareness and the artist community into the messaging of don't block the drains, don't throw your cigarette butts in the water, all of these things. And it's a very easy program and a great way to bring this about. We've got a new project we started last year in India, Make the Case. It's with MBA students, and we're about to broaden it to Hong Kong as an Asia base for university students around the region to find existing plastic pollution programs. It's not a startup, it's not for new innovations, it's existing programs around the region on plastic pollution to flush them out. Because so many times in different countries they get operating, but no one sees them and no one knows them, no one can learn from them. And the whole point here is to be able to showcase them so they can grow, scale, be replicated, and be learned from by others. And on the last slide, I'd like to just let you know that my friend Erden Eruch just landed in Hawaii after 11 weeks from California. He is rowing to us in Hong Kong. It's called Westbound Rower. He will be lit to Waikiki on October 1st to come to Hong Kong, which might take him another 6 months. First person in the world to do this, but we've built an education program for him every single week, and it's in 4 languages: English, Chinese, Spanish, and Turkish. So if you're anything related to the ocean and learning and schools and kids and adventure, please go on to Westbound Rower. We post it on Westbound Wednesdays, and it's something we hope you all can follow. And it's all about the ocean and awareness and bringing people closer together through sports and the environment. So thank you very much. I'd love to take your questions, and thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Douglas, for the excellent presentation. We have a lot of questions coming in for you, so let's now turn to the Q&A session. And the first question the audience has for you is, why isn't there more action? Is it because fossil fuel subsidies make plastic artificially cheap? Recent data from Hawaii's Marine Monument revealed that 40% of plastic waste is fishing nets, which are more dangerous for marine life. Any thoughts on how to address that?
Yeah, that's 2 questions in one in a way. Do you want me to stop screen sharing, or should I keep it up just so I know?
You can stop screen sharing.
No, you stopped it. Okay, so on the oil subsidies, of course, that's a super big challenge for recycled plastic content. It's very expensive to recycle plastic not necessarily because of the technology, but because of the sorting, gathering, collecting, and cleaning. So a great analogy is if you make an omelet and if your omelet is with eggs, ham, cheese, pepper, and mushroom, and someone says, that's great, thank you very much, but reconstitute the omelet back to the original state. And you say, wow, how do I do that? That's exactly what recycling is today. Very difficult. So the cost is in the reconstituting. It's not really the technology. And we don't have that. So when you're facing subsidies from the oil industry, and especially fracking in the US now, you get fracked plastic. Fracked plastic is low cost plastic from gas. It's a big challenge. It's just like overfishing industry, $35 billion feeding the fishing industry to catch more fish in deeper water farther away. So the point on the fishing nets is, yes, you're right, they are found more. It does not mean there's more plastic fishing nets than total plastic. Fishing nets usually are meant to float. They have buoys on them. They're super strong and big. And so when they're in the water, many of these are from FADs, which are fishing aggregation devices. The Japanese industry estimates there's 40,000 of those floating around in the ocean. And that's like a vertical reef that helps you catch fish. When the transponder dies or it gets lost in a storm, that becomes a ghost net and a fishing net. They're meant to float. So you cannot say that fishing nets are the most biggest plastic form that is out there. Plastic breaks down, it sinks. When there's bio life on it, it can sink faster than its normal buoyancy. And so we need to remember that the stuff coming out of our rivers and our land is really where we can make a difference as consumers and brands.
Got it. Thank you. The next question we have for you is, Honolulu has blue bins for recycling paper and number 1 and number 2 plastics. Does this do any good?
It does, in the sense that you know, the more that we aggregate things and separate them from contaminants, which can be food waste, the easier and the less expensive it is to reconstitute that omelet. So we do want to try to proliferate and put things in the right spot and make more volume, because if you have more volume of the right thing, the entrepreneurs and the innovators will come and, you know, make use of it. The problem and the challenge is many countries, including Hong Kong, we spend our time to sort things and put them in those bins, but then there's only one garbage truck and there's only one service that picks up the trash, and they all put it in the truck. And then we all think our time was wasted because it's aggregated now back in the garbage, and now they got to resort it. And many times, like in Hong Kong, they don't even have a sorting facility in the whole city. So they can't resort it. We really have to think of the way this is working. We really promote the sorting by just a simple way, wet and dry. The whole globe could do it wet and dry, and it would change the way recycling is done across the planet in a very simple way. Wet is the organics. As soon as that is out of the waste stream, you can get paper, glass, metal, plastic in a much better way. You can treat the organics, methane. When you mix plastic and organics, all goes to the landfill in a black plastic bag, and then we have methane and no recycling, and that's a problem.
Okay, got it. The next question is, paper over plastic, does it make sufficient difference?
Well, certainly the good thing is these days you can grow paper, whether you agree with that or not. It's regrowable, and it's also recyclable, and you can use recycled cardboard and recycled products. The problem with plastic is it's not going away. So if you put a piece of paper in the water, it will dissolve in a couple of days. If you put a piece of plastic in the water, it will take hundreds of years, and it will break up, and it will get in a big animal or small animal. Most people do not account for that life cycle part of plastic. So I would always say that paper is better than plastic.
Okay, thank you. Where is the reuse occurring? We cannot ship it to Asia anymore. Are there any significant plastic reuse program in the US?
Reuse meaning taking a bottle, like a Coke bottle, and then refilling it in your local community? Is that what
I
Do you
believe
mean, or do you
so.
mean recycling? I'm not sure. I mean, there are new
I am
reuse
not.
programs,
Yeah.
but they pretty much need to be localized, because if you're talking about reusing containers or things, you often need to wash them, or sterilize them, reaggregate them. So by product and service by service is a bit different. Certainly, I believe there's a huge opportunity. It's not been tapped at all for reverse supply chain and the couriers and the delivery companies of the world to recover materials. So the Alibabas and the Amazons should be focusing 1,000% on getting materials back from the customers that they shipped all to, and that will be a big opportunity.
Okay, thank you. The next question from the audience is, if you cannot recycle, what is the best way to dispose of plastic?
Well, first thing is, don't buy it or use it if you can avoid it. And we all know that's tough, but you don't need to buy a banana wrapped in plastic. You don't need to buy a coconut wrapped in plastic for sure. But again, each city and town has its own capacities to handle different types of plastic, and we all never know what that is. Very difficult to move between city and city, because these guys handle that kind of plastic and they not. Default is best to get all plastic into one space and let them figure it out, because the recyclers, if they have clean material, even if it's not all the same type that they need, often they will know how to sort it and be able to figure out how to use it. If we decide that we can't recycle it and we just put it into the other waste stream of paper and metal and food, we create a whole different kind of problem. So let's try to keep it in the same channel at least, and get your plastic all in one place. If people know there's volume, then they'll say, okay, I can use the recycled for the good stuff, and I'll use the other plastic now for a new product, which could be for concrete additive, can be for asphalt, can be for gasification. There's uses for it, but let's put it all in the same place and then decide how to do that.
Okay, got it. The next question is, Hawaii has banned plastic straws, silverware, and containers for takeout food. Is Asia moving in that direction?
Yeah, good question. And thank you, Hawaii, for doing that. We need leadership in different states and countries like that. And amazingly, China just announced the same exact thing just maybe 6 months ago. And I think it will be implemented early next year. How they enforce it and make it a reality is different, but they are the type of country that could do that. Hong Kong has just announced a similar program, and they've just put out a public consultation. So in 18 months, there may be also decreases in silver tableware and foodware that's plastic. Obviously, we all need to find some kind of alternatives that can hold wet things, hot things, be reusable. How do you get the material back and forth and clean it to avoid that single-use stuff? Thailand is starting to do it. So it's definitely coming, and it was only the last 2 years. I think COVID has also focused people on the issues of food waste and deliveries, obviously your mask and PPE, but people are thinking, wow, how much food waste how much food utensil waste and packaging did I get when I do these takeout orders every single day? So I think in a way that's a silver lining, that it's making people think about these solutions.
Okay, that's great. Next question. It is true that all plastic is recyclable technically. There are lots of problematic plastics that are nearly impossible to collect or clean to make it marketable to recycle. So do you think redesigned to get away from such flexibles like sachet is the answer? Love to hear more examples of innovation in Asia on improving collection.
Right. So that's a very good point and completely true. And what we really need, I showed some slides there from the retailers and the brands not having to pay for their use of materials. That's what the extended producer responsibility is, our laws and programs that put a little bit of a tax or a fee on the use of plastic as a package. Taiwan is doing that probably the best in Asia. They have a whole new program. Not new, but in the last decade, they've been taxing a little bit on plastic. That's your entry into the market as a company. But that money goes to use to recover materials and recycle. And now they have a whole industry, of course, with job creation and new innovation. So to standardize materials is very important because it's easier for recyclers to take, one or two or three types that they know and mass economy of scale process that. If we have too many types of plastic and the sachets and the thin films and the foils, it's very difficult. So there's ways in Asia, they're looking at refill stations for the sachets. Sachets might hold toothpaste, they might hold soap, they might hold some little kind of sauce or food. How can we aggregate that and deliver it through different, even mobile delivery stations in different towns and villages, so people can fill it in their own container and then not throw the sachet into the river or somewhere. So that's being worked on, still a challenge. But again, even those products are sometimes needed to keep those products safe and fresh, especially in humid Asia, as you know, in Hawaii. So we do need innovation still in materials and also how to reuse them if we're going to use them.
Got it. Thank you. Next question. When looking at developing infrastructure, is green energy being considered? Burning oil or coal to recycle plastic seems counterproductive.
That's a good point. It's chicken and egg for many countries that are still getting, some in Asia don't have wind power because it's not windy near the equator, and they've not put in the solar. So certainly solar can be one of those, gasification can be, but we still have to remember that the world is not perfect. And if you're going to alleviate one problem, you can't not alleviate it because you're worried about the other problem. So if you need energy to recycle and you clean the water, you help a community, you help all of their waste and health issues, you should not do that because you're worried about the energy used in the machinery and equipment to process that. So we have to remember that it's step by step. Once you get the machine and equipment, you can do it, then you can start looking at modifying that to use solar, hydrogen, batteries, whatever you want to do.
Okay, thank you. We have about 7 minutes left, and I believe we can squeeze in all of the questions. Next question is PDP looking into plastic alternatives like using shrimp skins or plant-based materials? What about the use of bacteria that eat plastic to deal with some of the excess that cannot be recycled?
Right, so that's a good question. And what our PDP does is focus people exactly into those questions for themselves. So when you do the PDP, it's like putting a mirror up to your company in your face and you say, wow, I didn't know I used that. What can I do next? How can I reuse it? How can I find a shrimp-based material that can work for that product with the right technical aspects and physical aspects? So we're not out there creating these new innovations, but we certainly promote them if they're a benefit to moving away from fossil fuel. So the two main things we want with PDP is less waste as a result of no virgin fossil fuel and or new innovative materials like you just mentioned, algae to make plastic, shrimp skin, crab shell, carbon, waste to make gas, to make plastic. That's all possible. So yeah, the PDP is the first step, and then asking yourselves some of these questions, what could we use next?
Okay, that was very interesting. Are there any best practice countries leading sustainable use of packaging? Any effective national policies that stand out?
Well, I would, some countries in the last 5 years followed each other and did bans on plastic bags or taxes on plastic bags, bans on straws. Now they're looking at single-use items and food utensils. Paris, I mean, France has a similar thing. So that's effective in getting people thinking about things, but it's not the whole solution because there's many, many, many other products out there. And you need to find alternatives, and that's fine. If you don't regulate and you don't have a policy, then the innovations will not come out at scale and at price points that that can be used. So we need that to happen. Other policies in Europe are now looking at taxation on virgin material. This is new. So if you're using 100% virgin material, they're putting an $800 per ton tax on the polymers. That is huge. We had a plan, an idea for this years back, and we never would have thought of putting $800 because we knew the industry wouldn't like it. But somehow the EU has managed to do this, and this really will change the way that demand for recycled content is propagated. So many countries, are moving in this direction, and the more we can embrace some of those changes, without making big problems for some stakeholders along the way is a good thing.
Okay, thank you. The next question has a very interesting example. I saw an Al Jazeera report about surfers in the Philippines who started stuffing plastic into plastic bottles, tying bottles into square bricks, using this to create shower stall walls. Are the UN and other organizations considering connecting the plastic crisis with the need for affordable housing?
Yes, that's coming. So there are countries in Africa, Philippines, many have copied this idea of filling plastic bottles with little plastic shreds. And then they put that bottle in a block, a cement block, or some kind of stucco or mud. And it does help to act as a filler, but it's not necessarily a long-term thing, because especially with UV light that will break down, but it's not maybe bad for non-structural uses of retaining walls and one-story buildings in places where they need shelter. So there are newer ways that you can use plastic aggregate for concrete, for real building and structural uses. And we're helping one of the companies, CRDC, out of Costa Rica. Very new stuff, very, very interesting, high tech, but using all the mixed dirty plastic that is not normally recycled in the recycling system. So this is all of the extra leftover that never gets recycled today. And that can easily, they've already done work with Habitat for Humanity, could be used for storms and emergency situations and rebuild. So big opportunity for that.
Okay, thank you. We have 1 minute left. I'm gonna squeeze in one more question. What is the state of knowledge about the prevalence and the impact of nano-sized plastic in waters?
That's a great question as well. And I'd say not a lot is known. Not for nanoplastic. There is for microplastic, but nanoplastic is a little bit smaller than nanoplastic, than microplastic. We personally don't spend too much time on microplastic in our work. We work on macroplastic, big pieces, because the world can't quite figure out our own waste and littering problem, which is the big pieces. And if we can't figure out the big pieces, then they become small pieces once they're in the sun and they're broken down. So we're really trying to work and prevent the big pieces from getting out into the world, and not the little tiny particles. So that's really not one of the areas that we focus on, but there's plenty of science going on in that area right now.
Okay, got it. Unfortunately, we're running out of time here, so we have to end here. Thank you very much, Douglas, for sharing your work, and to all our audience for participating and joining us this afternoon. And again, I invite you to join our next EWC Insights on October 20th for a talk by Victor Char. And until then, have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much. Mahalo in Hawaii.